Good evening, viewer. I hope this video finds you well. Today, I come to you with some thoughts about the importance of radical honesty, why this leads to the collapse of truth and the death of philosophy, and why animal faith is all we have. I don't have advice, but just observations. These are likely misguided coming from a human mind, but nonetheless, it is my attempt at grappling with the questions that rest in the hearts of the ancients and the moderns. So to begin with, what is truth? Now, Western thought, philosophy, psychology, even religion, these say that truth matters. Now, I believed for a long time that truth really mattered and that truth was fundamental, that questions have clear answers that are justifiable, and that if we look hard enough, we will find some correct view, a correct conclusion that could be provided to the questions deep within the hearts of humans. Questions of life's meaning, life's origin, of how to accept impermanence and mortality, of how to spend our time. Each of these able to be answered by different perspectives, but perhaps there was one out there which was the best, the most honest, and the most true. From the origins of philosophy, Plato stated that truth is the beginning of every good thing, both to gods and men. Aristotle claimed that the high-minded man must care more for the truth than for what people think. The Buddha claimed that three things cannot be long hidden: the sun, the moon, and the truth. And Jesus claimed that you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. There seems to be some kind of relationship between truth and a well-lived life. This is the way it appeared to me anyway. And so I delved deeply into philosophy and psychology, doubting what was doubtable, searching for something undoubtable, searching for the truth, something which was unfalsifiable and something which was infinitely verifiable. I wanted to find something honest, something that captured existence, something that made sense of what was going on. And as I delved deeper into these areas, I found an immense complexity of perspectives, answers, thoughts, all relying on different assumptions which themselves could not be objectively justified, and these being beyond our grasp, beyond the ability of the mind. The quest for truth results in the collapse of truth, and the collapse of truth results in the death of philosophy as we know it. And it becomes not a quest for truth, for ultimate answers, but it becomes therapeutic and remedial and guesswork. And with the death of philosophy, what we find is that all of this was investigated because of thinking and thoughts and an attachment to thought, and that perhaps the most honest, the most true thing anyone can do is relinquish this attachment and live via the animal faiths that guide our existence. For me, this is where the journey of philosophy and of a genuine and honest approach to truth takes us. Animal faith, beyond thinking. Even what I'm saying here, there's a lot of assumptions, a lot of big claims, but I'll do my best here to clearly show you my observations. And I'm not making any claims about what you should do with this and how you should lead your life. You must live your life the way you see fit, based on the beliefs that fulfill your values and suit your heart. But this investigation has led me to taking thought off the pedestal that it situated itself upon, to place something new on that throne. Nothingness. Silence. That is the only thing that can really capture anything true. Words, like Yukio Mishima said, are white ants. They are corrosive, taking away from reality. We will always be distant from the truth, if there is a truth, if there is any distance between us and the truth. But all of this questioning, all of these statements, all of these words, when followed to their conclusions, bring us back here, into the present moment. But in order for us to get to the present moment, we need to start at the beginning. So why does truth even matter? What is the psychology behind the importance of truth? So our drive for truth is far more than an abstract intellectual pursuit limited to ancient men standing in togas or old professors in musty suits lecturing old information to young students, away from the realities of everyday life. The drive for truth is deeply rooted in our emotions, our sense of self, and the very way we navigate existence. For thousands of years, Western culture has elevated truth to the highest ideal. From the allegory of Plato's cave, where the journey from shadow to light symbolizes the soul's awakening to ultimate reality, to St. Augustine's conception of divine truth as the foundation of all knowledge, and through to Descartes' quest for absolute certainty by doubting everything he could. The message is clear. Truth has often been considered the key to freedom, meaning, and virtue. In my experience, anyway. During the Enlightenment period, this emphasis intensified with the valorization of reason and science as the surest paths to truth. The idea emerged that by uncovering truth, we could achieve mastery over nature, society, and even ourselves. Now, psychologically, truth offers us several vital things. Firstly, it offers us predictability and security. Knowing the truth could provide stability, and if we understand how things really work, we feel that we can predict, control, and avoid danger. Secondly, it provides meaning and coherence. Truth provides a framework that makes life intelligible. It answers the question of why I'm here and what do I do? And if I know what is true about the world, I can shape a coherent narrative about myself and my place in it. And thirdly, honesty and truthfulness are seen as virtues, because being truthful is equated with being good, authentic, and worthy of respect. This moral dimension adds emotional weight to the quest for truth, because to live without truth is to live in moral failure or self-deception. Thus, what we can see here is that beneath the rational arguments and philosophical theories about truth lies a deeply existential and emotional quest. When we say we want truth, what we might really want is to feel safe, coherent, and morally grounded. The search for truth is inseparable from the human desire for identity, belonging, and purpose. We, at least in the context I find myself in, are embedded in this search or striving for truth. So I searched for truth. I doubted what could be doubted. When there was no certainty, I moved on, peeling back another layer, figuring out what this belief or this perspective or this assumption relied on. Whether psychological, philosophical, spiritual, religious, biological, there is a why, an explanation, something that it leans on, that deepens the further you look. But when I looked closely enough and far enough, when I peeled back enough layers, I noticed something strange. There was no end. There was nothing fundamental to rely on. There was no final answer, just a mess of complex intricacies which I had to take for granted. The thing is that truth isn't itself the be-all and end-all. The idea that there's just some final truth is itself guesswork of the human mind. Truth itself relies on ways of knowing, and I had never examined these. The way I sought truth was through reason only, somewhat through my senses and often through the words in my language. But how could I guarantee that any of these corresponded to what I was looking for, that they corresponded to reality? So I turned my attention away from the content of truth and instead looked at the conditions of knowing truth. And here the problem emerged. Every tool that I used to seek truth, reason, perception, language, was part of the very system that I was trying to test. To question reason, I had to use reason. To doubt perception, I had to perceive, and to analyze language, I had to speak. It was like trying to lift myself by my own bootstraps. The investigation folded in on itself, not because I stopped believing in truth, but because I saw that every path to it curved back into the circle of human experience. This is where the problem begins, and where thinkers like Santayana, Hume, Kant, Wittgenstein, Nietzsche, and Camus each in their own way reached a similar boundary. Every act of knowing rests on something that it cannot prove. To trust reason, I need to assume that reason leads to truth. To trust perception, I must assume my senses reveal something real. To trust memory, I must assume continuity, and even to doubt these things, I must already rely on them. I must use reason to question reason and use experience to doubt experience. Now, what am I saying here over and over again? The Spanish-American philosopher George Santayana called this the animal faith behind all knowledge. The spontaneous pre-rational trust that there is a world and that it behaves consistently enough to make thought possible. The faith that there is a prerequisite for any kind of functioning in the world. No one chooses this faith. It is the condition of our functioning, the groundless ground of reason. We can't justify reason without circularity. We can only justify reason with faith. Yet we can't live without it. It is what it is. By virtue of existing, by living, we live as if reality appears trustworthy, even though we can't really prove that it is. So already the project of grounding truth runs into a wall, the wall of its own conditions, the wall of what it relies on. Now Immanuel Kant made this explicit. He said that what we call knowledge is not access to things as they are in themselves, but to things as they appear within the human framework of experience. That space, time, causality, object, subject, these are not features of the world out there, but they are features of our cognitive architecture. They are how the world shows up for us. What that means is that every truth is human truth, mediated by the lens of our species, and that the thing in itself, or whatever reality is beyond experience, beyond our animal faith, beyond our pre-rational limitations, remains forever unknowable. So, even at this fundamental level, we can't know if thought says anything about truth. To rely on thought as accurate requires faith, and it is just as possible that thought evolves for survival and meaning-making rather than something to discern ultimate truth. Even David Hume showed us that the most basic truths, like cause and effect, the continuity of self, the reality of the external world, rest on habit, not proof. We see one event follow another and infer causation, but we never perceive it necessarily as it is itself. What we call knowledge almost appears to be habit and expectation, animal pattern recognition dressed in philosophical language. This habitual belief in the regularity of experience relies on a natural faith required by the organism in order to act in the world. So what we're seeing here is that what we call knowledge in an ultimate sense is beyond what we as humans can gather. But even if, in theory, reality could be known, Ludwig Wittgenstein closes the trap that we've opened up. He shows that our very language, the medium through which we express and share knowledge, confines what can be said. Meaning doesn't transparently map onto reality. It arises only within human forms of life, within our particular ways of using words. There will never be a neutral standpoint or a view from nowhere, no pure language of truth. So even if the world could be grasped in its entirety, we could never say it. We're trapped within the grammar of our species. The limits of our language are the limits of our world. So Wittgenstein, as his fundamental grounding belief, says that we should dwell in the openness of our being, that is the truth of the matter and all else is speculation. All there is an embedded dwelling that we can't escape from, that we are embedded in whatever is happening, that we can't know it, and even if we could never capture it. Now, this sounded like a pretty fair endpoint, a fair block, a fair obstacle, a wall that we couldn't go over, that there is something happening and that we either can know it and won't, or can't know it. But even here, doubt emerges, because if all meaning depends on language, then isn't the very idea of a limit of language still spoken within language? Because if so, Wittgenstein's wall may not be the final one. It might simply be another boundary drawn from within a particular cultural, historical, and linguistic horizon, which is where postmodernism presses further. Thinkers like Derrida, Foucault, and Lyotard, they suggest there isn't a final wall. There are shifting structures of discourse and power that define what counts as truth in a given time. And even the claim there are limits is itself conditioned by the way we've learned to think and speak. So the foundation recedes again. Every limit I draw is drawn from somewhere, from a standpoint that I can't step outside of and that can be questioned. Truth once again dissolves into an open field of appearances, interpretations, and relations. So at this point, what remains? Every attempt to ground the truth ends by showing its dependence on unprovable assumptions. Every act of knowing is filtered through the structures of human experience, and every statement of truth relies on a context of meaning that it cannot itself justify. So the absolute dissolves. All that remains is appearance, the living fact of experience before interpretation. Santayana calls this the block of experience, the brute immediate happening of consciousness or of appearance prior to explanation. This is almost like what Nietzsche calls the death of God, which is the collapse of the idea of an ultimate measure, or what Camus calls the absurd, the confrontation between the mind's hunger for clarity and the world's silence. This might also be what the Buddha calls emptiness, the recognition that there isn't a fundamental and that all forms are contingent and interdependent. Now for Santayana, this isn't despair, but it provides clarity, because when the illusion of certainty falls away, what remains is not nothingness, but it is actually just the detachment from an over-reliance on truth and thought. It is the acceptance that something is, that experience happens, and that this is enough to live from. So as the pursuit of absolute truth unraveled, metaphysics, which is the project of explaining reality from some ultimate standpoint, began to lose its grip on me. Now, for centuries, philosophers have tried to build a secure foundation for knowledge, and idealists have claimed that everything is mind or spirit and that reality is the unfolding of consciousness. Physicalists have claimed that everything is matter, that thought and experience are byproducts of physical processes. And then there are others like dualists, panpsychists, neutral monists who tried to reconcile the two. But the more I examined these positions, the more I saw that each of them continued to rely on assumptions, on words, on logic, on coherence, but not on truth, because it's never attainable. It's a contest for which is more right, for which light shines more visibility on the fog of infinite darkness. And interestingly, these positions almost always seemed like a reflection of human longing. It seemed like a reflection of us rather than reality, of needs for certainty, control, and coherence. Each system tells a story about what must be, but none could escape the same circular trap, that to describe reality they must already assume the very capacities that they claim to explain. Now this is where Santayana became decisive for me, because he called these grand systems poetry, and I think that that's a wonderful way to capture it. They are beautiful, imaginative structures built atop something far more primitive and honest, his animal faith. Now, animal faith is not an argument, it's the spontaneous pre-rational trust that the world exists and that my senses more or less belong to it. It's what underlies every act of thought, every claim to truth. Even the skeptic who doubts everything still stands quite literally on this faith. He still eats and breathes and has some kind of functioning occurring. So in saying this, I begin to see that every metaphysical claim could really be a poetic and symbolic projection of a human need. Perhaps idealism reflects the yearning for connection and coherence and meaning. Physicalism reflects a yearning for mastery, control, and dominance and prediction. Theism reflects a yearning for protection and certainty and moral order. Naturalism reflects harmony and need for unity with the world. Nihilism reflects a yearning for relief from falsehood, to burn away illusion. And perhaps what I'm arguing from, whatever we might call it, reflects a yearning for honesty and simplicity. And why is that? Why is that important to me? That is a question that I will never be able to completely justify. It is what it is, and whatever the answer is, I don't know it. But the list goes on, and these perspectives appear to be reflections of needs rather than reflections of truth. They may be expressions of temperament, and this is where my own tools, like skepticism, phenomenological reflection, and existential awareness, expose the limits of metaphysics. They show me that every system depends on the same hidden assumption, that thought can step outside of life to grasp what it is, but thought can't do that. It's part of life, not outside it. And even if we were to approach metaphysics from the point of view of something that provides coherence or meaning rather than truth, it isn't what I'm looking for, and it can't offer me what I seek. It can't offer me that ultimate certainty. Additionally, a lot of these positions appear to be anthropomorphic. Now, knowledge of these always relies on human logic, reason, experience, and any extension of these beyond humans is anthropomorphic, and knowing that we as humans Limited by our animal faith, we can never apply the whole truth to something else. We can only limit and distort it. And so for me, metaphysics collapses not into nihilism but into experience itself. This is the animal faith I return to each time. It's not a belief system, but it is the conclusion of this journey, the conclusion of this searching. It is a posture of trust in life as it appears. Now, in Santayana's terms, knowledge becomes symbolic. It's useful, it's poetic, it's creative, but never final. Even to say that the truth is in this present moment, in this living, that itself is a claim that can't be justified. It relies on many, many, many unverifiable things. So we're left again with this animal faith. There appears to be some happening, and there are things I rely on pre-rationally to function in this happening. And that's what my mind is telling me. That's the baseline that it can get to. But after discarding metaphysics, I realized something. I'm doubting and moving past all these systems of belief, unsatisfied with what I'm finding. But how or why am I even doing any of this? It all starts with thought. That is how any of these labels and concepts are considered internally. I think thought, as I've been using it, is the enemy. For most of the Western tradition, thought was our highest faculty, the divine spark that lifted us above the animals. From Plato to Descartes, we were told that to think clearly was to know truly, and to know truly was to live rightly. Thought was sacred, the mirror of reality, the route to God, the mark of the rational soul. The intellectual life was considered desirable. But what I've found is that following thought to its far reaches, to its edges, results in self-destruction. Thought is brilliant, but blind. It's a tool for mapping reality, but not for inhabiting it. It can describe, it can analyze, it can interpret, but it cannot truly touch. Thought's great strength is also its limitation. It divides, it abstracts, it represents, it takes the fluid immediacy of experience and freezes it into symbols and concepts. These abstractions help us navigate the world. They help us build and plan and communicate, but they can also risk alienating us from the world itself. We begin to mistake the map for the territory, the word for the thing, and the idea for life itself. And this is the loop of skepticism that I fell into. Once thought starts questioning its own foundations, it turns inward, endlessly chasing its own tail. Every answer becomes another question, every certainty another assumption. There is no bottom, only the spinning wheel of self-reference. My mind is doing what the mind does, and I've just fulfilled its purpose. And the thing is, it can't succeed at what it wants to do. So the problem isn't really with thinking itself. The problem, the enemy, is prioritizing thinking as the master, thought or reason as the commander of the chariot, commandeering feelings and behaviors is a misguided image and a misguided priority. When we treat thought as the only or highest mode of knowing, we forget that it arises within something larger, within perception, feeling, embodiment, and participation in life. These are all embedded and interconnected. Well, that's the way it appears anyway. Thought is one of many things that we are embedded with. It's one of many ways of knowing, along with sense perception and intuition. Thought as it appears is a tool of adaptation and not a ladder to transcendence. It helps us make sense, but it cannot be sense itself. It can be used for convenience to function, but it's not the final arbiter of reality. Perhaps true wisdom isn't in knowing. Perhaps true wisdom is in letting go of knowledge, of truth. Perhaps true wisdom is letting go of the concept of wisdom, and perhaps true wisdom is actually silence. Perhaps silence is the only response to this question and search for truth, reality, and thought. And when we finally see this, I believe that philosophy as we know it reaches its end. It loses its purpose and it steps off the pedestal that we've put it on. For philosophy has long been the cathedral built around thought, housing the faith that the mind could illuminate the foundations of being. But if thought is only one gesture within life, then its light is not divine. It is local, impartial, and fleeting. The death of philosophy then is not a tragedy, but a metamorphosis, a maturation. It's the moment when thought bows to what it cannot explain. This is not the end of reflection or inquiry, but the end of the grand metaphysical quest for absolute foundations. Philosophy ripens into wisdom when thought bows to life's primacy and accepts its limitations. Perhaps philosophy becomes psychology, and however we can understand our human nature, rather than abstract ideas beyond our lived experience. Without truth, we don't need thought as much as we thought we did. And without this reliance on thought, we can reshape philosophy to be something more embodied, more therapeutic, more remedial, more humble, and based on values separate from truth. So, when truth, thought, metaphysics, and philosophy collapsed, I expected nothing to remain. No truth, no foundation, and only emptiness. But instead, what emerged was relief. That if absolute truth is unattainable, then perhaps truth is not the highest good at all. Perhaps we shouldn't chase something we can never get, or we better have really good reasons to do so. Truth, I realized, is not a destination, it's a tool. One way of orienting ourselves in the world, valuable only insofar as it serves life. To treat it as ultimate is to confuse the map for the terrain. And once that illusion fell, the question that had driven me, the question of what is true, transformed into something more embedded in my experience. It transformed into asking something like, what do I value and how do I want to live? This is where the Western and modern view kicks into my perspective, and it's an existential pivot. It's the point where skepticism itself matures. It's the humility of skepticism. The collapse of metaphysical certainty doesn't end the search, but it redirects it from abstraction to embodiment. Now, Santayama points to a similar conclusion, that if all knowledge is grounded in animal faith, in our spontaneous trust in the flux of experience, then the task is not to escape it, but to live within it. And he called this living harmoniously within limits. We are not gods, but animals capable of reflection, and wisdom lies in accepting that condition rather than resenting it. Now, this is what he says. Do I agree with it? I can't really say. I don't know how we should live. All I can say is what I observe, and that any of this beyond thought relies on valuing. Whatever one's value is, that is what one pursues, and nothing is better than anything else in an objective sense. They are better relative to what we as humans choose to value. What appears to be happening here is that there is something happening. I am aware. This is the animal faith. It is here and now. From there, what's the next observation? What's the leap that I take? Well, it appears that life must be lived, and that living requires action or inaction. And these rely on values, either conscious or subconscious. And after awareness of experience begins, after the embedded tool of reason sneers itself at us, after we have the ability to choose to engage our prefrontal cortex, we can become aware of our values and translate these into living. Are there worse or better values? I don't know. Are there other ways to live rather than by our values? Potentially. But for me, values are what have been given as that mode of living. Values are what comes after awareness, and all I can do is observe them as what appear to be my own and live by them. After tearing down every claim to certainty, what remains is something astonishingly simple. Life itself, silence, awareness, this is what it comes down to. As soon as I start thinking, I employ these animal faiths, these pre-rational beliefs, and it's always happening in the background, even when I'm not noticing it. But beyond these, in silence, is where the journey of the search for truth takes us. What we're talking about here is not the idea of life. It's not some abstract metaphysics or an ultimate truth, but it's the felt, lived immediacy of being here at all. Breathing, sensing, valuing, relating, this raw presence becomes the new foundation, not because it explains anything, but because it can't be denied without being affirmed in the very act of doubt. It is what remains when we follow thought to its conclusion. To live is already to trust. Even the skeptic who denies all truths relies on the body's spontaneous faith, that food will nourish, that the ground will hold, that others exist enough to speak to. This is animal faith. And The thing is that once I believed truth would free me, and now I see that what frees me is humility, to recognize that thought is only one voice among many in the orchestra of life, and that we can't think our way to reality, we can only live it. And at this stage, it seems that psychology is what philosophy transforms into, not as a reduction, but as a deepening. The question is no longer a metaphysical what is, but it becomes existential and practical. It's how do I make meaning within my limits? What values guide me when certainty is impossible? And how do I live well, knowing I'll never know? But why are these questions even worth exploring? They aren't universal human questions. They're questions based on our time and our context. But they appear meaningful to me, to us, to our disciplines. They appear to result in lives that are better lived. And if we don't think about it too much, if we don't think about it too deeply, this is okay. This is where thought turns inward and becomes ethical. And it's no longer about escaping illusion, but about refusing to live in bad faith. The denial of our finitude, our dependency, our context, this is what we want to avoid. And so skepticism here becomes a moral compass. It's not a weapon of destruction, but a way to stay honest to an extent. To avoid the arrogance of claiming more than one can know to an extent, and that this appears to me to result in a life well lived for me. You could ask me, given my suspicion of everything, how can I even trust skepticism? What if skepticism is mistaken? And to that I respond that you may be right, but upon my awareness, my animal faith, skepticism appears to be something that makes me feel more fulfilled. And because I've taken truth and thought to its limits and found that there's nothing there, I can humbly accept that skepticism may be wrong and may misguide me, but it seems good enough at the moment, and that is enough. That is what works for me. And so faith, then, is reclaimed, not as belief in unseen absolutes, but as trust in the seen, in the rhythms of life that carry us whether or not we understand them. It is faith that says that this is enough. And in that acceptance, philosophy softens into gratitude. What once felt like the collapse of truth now reveals itself as an opening. It's an invitation to live more gently, more attentively, more humanly when we take this truth as something to consider and not as the ultimate be-all and end-all of our existence. We don't need certainty or truth to love. We don't need meaning to care, and we don't need metaphysics to live well. We don't need anything in a conscious and objective sense. We are already here. We are meeting needs. We're awake to what we're awake to, and we're missing what we're not awake to. And that appears to be what's happening. And that is the only faith that I need. For me, the faith in the seen is enough. And even this awareness, this pre-rational animal faith, can be questioned. It can be divided, and justification can be sought for it. But I don't think it'll get us anywhere. And even if it does, it doesn't really change anything of importance. It is likely going to be hypothesis and guesswork, and these don't interest me as much anymore. So, when I return to this faith, this quiet trust that something is happening and I'm a part of it, I find myself in the present, and I find myself unburdened. What remains are things that can't be reduced, the things that have a felt realism, the things that cognitively feel real when they're not considered too much, when they're not abstracted or broken down. Things like love and gratitude and impermanence, community, identity. These aren't derived from theory or justified by reason. They arise. They're felt, they're embodied, they're happening. They are what being does when it's allowed to live without explanation for me, in my specific context. So I no longer ask where they come from to such an extent, because I don't really need to. The search for origins belongs to a different era of mind, one that mistook understanding for presence. These things are here, and that is enough. So I can pursue them, express them, live them, not because they're true in an absolute sense, but because they move me, shape me, and connect me to the pulse of existence, and they are how my life, recognizes itself. Philosophy, in its grand metaphysical form, has run its course, and it's done its work. It has cleared away illusion, exposed the limits of thought, and brought me to the edge of silence. And beyond that edge, only life remains. And for me, that is enough. I can contemplate my mortality, how to reduce suffering, how to live a good life, how to avoid regret, how to make the most of the present, how to appreciate those around me, and I can do these without appeal to something objective, something transcendental, something beyond. It appears to me like I'm here, and that one day I will perish, and that I am aware of this, and that these are what ring true to my heart and capture me and fulfill my values, and that's a good enough reason to pursue those. So, we have reached the end of my philosophical musings. And here is a summary of what I've covered. That the quest for absolute truth ends in an epistemic horizon. That metaphysical systems are poetic constructs, not final answers, and that thought, while valuable, is limited. If we follow the journey for truth, the journey of philosophy, and the journey of thought, all roads lead to animal faith, a pre-rational and subconscious trust in our embodied lived experience. You can, if you choose to, select your values consciously, knowing that they are provisional but meaningful for you and that that is good enough. In the end, life itself needs no justification, and this is the freedom in accepting philosophy's death. Now, Voltaire stated that faith consists in believing when it is beyond the power of reason to believe. We already have that faith, even without knowing. And that in itself is still an assumption, a worldview, an addition, a deformity on what is there. But it's all free game. It's all guesswork. Even this, even the words coming out of my mouth. And sometimes it feels like too much to bear. But perhaps we must relinquish our thoughts, our speech in the search for truth. Philosophy can become therapeutic. It can become remedial, but it is not an honest inquiry into reality. It just can't be. We must use these tools to function in the world. I must continue to speak, to think, to act, to exist, but I must do these things without ultimate truth, without ultimate certainty, and without a strict adherence to my thoughts. Now, I hope that made some sense. But the conclusion is this, that truth in the way we pursue it is unattainable, and that thought is limited in the pursuit of truth. And that when we follow truth to its conclusion, we are left with the silence and awareness of the here and now, of being itself. And that from here, we can build and create and discover values that suit us and live by those and become aware of why we do what we do. And if you have some other way of living and some other way of making you smile and another way that feels better or more coherent or truer to you, it's probably in your best interest to pursue that. Now, I'd like to finish off with two quotes. One is by the Eastern Taoist sage Lao Tzu, and he stated that to know what you do not know is the best. To think you know when you do not is a disease. Recognizing this disease as a disease is to be free of it. That feels kind of like what we've done today, recognizing the disease of thinking that I can know and do know. But perhaps knowing that I don't know is itself a disease. Who knows? And then from the Western side, a lovely quote from Ludwig Wittgenstein, who stated that whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. And I think that captures pretty well, where this contemplation takes me. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and your feelings, because our thoughts can be limited. But this was it for me. Thank you.